Good afternoon and welcome to Atlanta Rotary. Hope the new year is off to a great start for all of you. We miss seeing you, but very much appreciate your flexibility as we shift to our virtual program format and continue to monitor the numbers on the COVID front. Please be sure to sign in. Just a quick housekeeping item using the QR code that will show up on your screen here in a moment. This is just like the QR codes we use for our live programs. So please let us know about your attendance. To kick us off today, I'm excited to welcome to the stage our past president, Bill Todd, who will lead us in our invocation and our Pledge of Allegiance. Bill, hope you're having a great start to the new year.
I am. Thank you, Catherine.
Great. Thank you for kicking us off.
Let us pray. Glorious God, we gather together on this beautiful, crisp winter day in the spirit of fellowship and service, just as you have taught us in every great faith tradition. We regret that we sometimes forget to live in the present, to be grateful for what is instead of what we wish, and we vow to do better. We, your children and servants, thank you for the many blessings you shower upon us, most not deserved, but given by your grace. Thank you for our health, our education, and our great good fortune to be born into this place at this time. Please help us to use these gifts to bring people together rather than divide, to heal the sick, to ease the burden of those troubled by the challenges of life, to raise up the downtrodden, and to comfort the sad and lonely. We ask you to open our ears and our hearts to the wisdom of our speakers, to learn about the creation of wealth and the fair distribution of those riches among all your people. Give our speakers voices to educate and inspire us. We ask all these things in your holy name. Amen. And now if you'll join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Bill. Just beautiful words to get us started. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, we have a fantastic program ahead. Following our announcements, we are excited to welcome new member Leona Barr Davenport, who will be introduced by Tad Hutchison. And then we shift into a fascinating program. Dennis Lockhart will kick off our January series on the economy, hosting a conversation about income inequality and the business and economic aspects of that situation. We're pleased to have with us two of Georgia's leading economic thinkers, David Altig with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta and David Ribar with Georgia Policy Labs. So very much looking forward to that conversation. Also, as a preview, as we look out into life beyond our virtual programming, we have several new initiatives around the corner to give you an opportunity to engage more directly with your fellow Rotarians. This includes our next Rotary on the Road, which will be at the Norfolk Southern headquarters. We have a great opportunity to visit their brand new headquarters and their Rail Operations War Room. Very cool new space that I'm not sure who else had a chance to see that. So it's a special opportunity. We have a spring cocktail event at the Atlanta Botanical Garden and a brand new small group dinner series where you will have a chance to get together with 8 to 10 of your fellow Rotary colleagues and get to know them in a more casual setting. So more on all of that very soon, just around the corner. A few announcements. A hearty congratulations to our own Bob Hope, who was recently inducted into the Have Foundation Hall of Fame. His work on the Honduras Hope Project has been an incredible asset to our club. Honduras Hope, as you may know, is the longest continuously running service project of Rotary International. Under Bob's leadership, Atlanta Rotary has played a key role in this project for over 22 years. And many of our club members, as you can see from some of these photographs here on the screen, many of our club members have attended this event annually for years as they help build schools for children in the remote areas of the Agalta Valley. Honduras Hope has their next trip coming up in March 5th through 12th. So please feel free to reach out to Bob Hope if you are interested in joining that trip. Congratulations again to Bob, and a sincere thanks to all of you in Rotary who've attended this annual trip and all that you're doing to help advance the education of children in Honduras. We continue to grieve the tragic passing of MARTA CEO and fellow Rotarian Jeff Parker, whom we lost far too early. We feel Jeff's loss as a visionary leader of our community, but even more so as a father and a husband and a wonderful friend to so many of us. A memorial service will be held January 29th at 10 a.m. at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. Please touch base with Gina if you'd like further details about that. And I invite you now to join me in a moment of silence as we honor the life of our wonderful friend Jeff, and also share our hearts with all of those who are struggling during these very difficult times for mental health. Thank you. I'm now pleased to introduce fellow Rotarian Tad Hutchison, who will introduce new member Leona Barr Davenport. And as the two of them are coming to the stage, hello, great to see both of you. I wanted to also say a special congratulations to Tad, who's being honored by the Business Chronicle at its February 17th, I believe it is, Leaders in Corporate Citizenship Awards. I know Tad is also joined by Rotarians David Lewis and Dan Gordon, who are also being honored, but congratulations to you, Tad.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for sponsoring Leona. I'm so excited to hear the new introduction.
Well, thank you, President Kelly. It's my honor today to join with Rotarians Erica Qualls Beatty and Milton Jones to introduce a new Rotarian, Leona Barr Davenport, who serves as the president and CEO of the Atlanta Business League. Founded in 1933, the ABL fosters the growth, creation, and development of successful business enterprises owned, operated, and managed by Black entrepreneurs and business leaders in Metro Atlanta. The best way to think of the ABL is the Chamber of Commerce for Black businesses and leaders. Many Atlantans have served on her board of directors, including Shirley Franklin, Andrew Young, Milton Jones, Egbert Perry, Erica Qualls Beatty, and Jerome and Michael Russell, just to name a few. One of 10 children from sharecropper parents in rural South Carolina, Leona went on to great accomplishments, way too many to list here, but she holds a BS degree from Benedict College and an MBA from Clark Atlanta University, and has been at the Atlanta Business League for 35 years. That's amazing. No one has built Black businesses or Black business leaders like Leona Barr Davenport. And I'd encourage each one of you to go online and learn more about the Atlanta Business League, join the ABL, and use their members for goods and services. Now, a few questions for Leona. Leona, the ABL has many programs for building businesses, networking, and developing entrepreneurs. One of your newest programs, and one of my favorite, is taking your business to the next level. Can you explain this program briefly to the audience?
Sure. Thank you, Tad. The ABL Take Your Business to the Next Level program is focused on capacity building for Black business owners. And we implement that program by way of DISC assessments, business assessments, branding, focus on finance, customer service, and we encourage our cohort to work on their business instead of in their business. So it has been very successful, and we are so excited about our next upcoming class.
Well, thank you. I think this audience in particular would be very interested in how this program came to be. At the ABL CEO luncheon in 2018, where Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta, was being recognized with the Herman J. Russell CEO of the Year Award, he surprised Milton Jones, then the board chair of the Atlanta Business League, with a $500,000 gift to help launch the Taking Your Business to the Next Level program. That was a great day for you and me, Milton, Ed, and the Atlanta Business League. So, Leona, what are the greatest challenges facing Black business owners and entrepreneurs today?
There's a list, but the top three that I would mention is access to capital, business opportunities, and moving past perceptions. What we find quite often is that there is a perception about Black business owners that is not true. And we work with corporations, government, to introduce our members to them, to make sure that they understand who they are, the kinds of businesses that they represent, and the kind of work that they've done. So making sure that the buyers and those people in certain positions understand that they are capable and that they have the ability to do the work. Many of our businesses are first generation business owners, so they do not have the luxury of the family or the background of the family. So that is one of the obstacles that they have to get by, and they do. Many of them are college graduates. Others grow businesses out of necessity. And I will mention COVID as a perfect example. More businesses were started during COVID than in previous years. And one of the reasons for that is that they had to find a way to be home with their children and to work closely to their homes and make money at the same time. So so much, Tad, we don't have enough time to really talk about all that of the obstacles that we run into, but they are there. You have now purchasing organizations that businesses have to go through in order to do business with some of the major companies. And those purchasing organizations represent another layer that our members have to endure.
All right, I know we're short on time, so one final thought. I have known Leona Barr Davenport longer than I've known my wife, Janet. And when I told Leona and Erica Qualls Beatty, who at the time was the chair of the Atlanta Business League Board, that I was getting married 13 years ago to a pilot, they set up a lunch for her at the Marriott Marquis, and they wanted to meet my wife, Janet, my future wife, Janet, and make sure that she was okay. And they came back. I'm so happy these ladies approved my wife and have become good friends since then. So, Leona, what your response to that?
Listen, you married a great one. We gave you the thumbs up immediately, and it was one of the best lunches we've ever had. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, welcome to the club. Thank you. And we're now back to President Kelly.
Thank you so much. Leona, I'm impressed that in addition to promoting businesses and entrepreneurship, you're providing a marital pre-screening services as needed.
Absolutely. On an as-needed basis.
Many skills. Well, welcome to the world's greatest Rotary Club. I have enjoyed seeing you this fall. You're such a wonderful regular attendee at our programs, and I know that you will enjoy getting to know this fantastic group of club members, and we all look forward to getting to know you better in the months ahead. So official welcome to you, and sending you a virtual pin, which we will follow up with soon.
Thank you so much. Catherine.
Great. Thank you both. We have spoken really since the beginning of this year about the dubious distinction that Atlanta has as the #1 city in the United States for income inequality. And as we kick off our January economic series, we're focusing today on that very attribute, income inequality, and what that means from a business and economic perspective for our businesses and for our broader Georgia economy. We're excited to have our fellow Rotarian, Dennis Lockhart, leading us in that discussion. Dennis is a wonderful friend to our club. He's widely acclaimed for his financial leadership across a career that spans the private sector and academia and government. He is served as former president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and also during that time served on the Fed's Open Market Committee and chaired its Conference of Presidents. His impressive career includes key leadership roles on the faculty of Johns Hopkins and Georgetown Universities, key roles with Heller International Group and Citicorp, and the advisory committee to the U.S. Export-Import Bank. We continue to benefit from Dennis's thought leadership on economic issues and bringing together wonderful programming for us each year. As I said, Dennis is a wonderful friend to our club, and we are so grateful to have him kicking off our series now for January. And Dennis, we look forward to hearing what you have in store for us today.
Well, thank you so much, President Catherine, and it's a delight to be back with the club. The original plan for the month of January was we were going to have 3 programs on economic issues and economic concerns of our time, and best laid plans didn't work out. Raphael Bostic was going to kick it off 2 weeks ago, and I was going to interview Raphael. We had to postpone that program. Today, we do have a program on a very important economic issue. And then next week, I'll be with you again, but it will not be on an economic issue. So we're scrambling here to put this together, but today we have the benefit of 2 of Atlanta's foremost economists to talk about inequality. Now, inequality is a big, unwieldy, complex subject with multiple dimensions. You can argue that there is income inequality, there is inequality of opportunity, and there is wealth inequality. And all of those dimensions of inequality are, of course, connected. As Catherine said, today we're going to focus mostly on national and local income inequality, but inevitably we'll talk about some of those other dimensions. This panel is meant to be educational for the club. The 3 of us will try our hardest to stay away from contentious political issues and stay above the fray. And I'm delighted to be joined today by, as I said, 2 very fine economists who are resident in Atlanta. So let me, if I may refer to my notes, give you an introduction of the 2 Davids that we're going to hear from today. Dr. David Ribar is an applied microeconomist, professor of economics at Georgia State University, and faculty director of the Child and Family Policy Lab that's within the Georgia Policy Labs that's in the Andrew Young School at Georgia State. David's research focuses on issues of poverty and household economics. He's been widely published in many journals, including the Journal of Demography, the Journal of Population Economics, the Review of Economics of the Household, the Journal of Marriage and Family, and the Southern Economic Journal. David Ribar received his BA from the College of William and Mary and an MA and PhD from Brown University. My former colleague, David Altig, Dr. David Altig, whom I call Dave, is the Executive Vice President and Director of Research at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. He's primarily a monetary economist, but he oversees a staff of around 25 PhD economists at the Atlanta Fed who research a very wide range of subjects. He is Raphael Bostic's primary policy advisor. I should mention that Fed officials today, Monday, are in a blackout period before the Federal Open Market Committee meeting that starts tomorrow. So Dave cannot comment on matters of economic policy today, but our subject matter on inequality is in bounds. Dave has been with the Fed since 1991. Before joining the Atlanta Fed in 2007, he was a member of the research team at the Cleveland Fed. I can say from personal experience that Dave is one of the finest economists in the Federal Reserve System, from whom I learned a great deal while I was in my position. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. He's a board member and vice president-elect of the National Association of Business Economists. Dave has a bachelor's degree from the University of Iowa, and he also got his PhD at Brown University. So we have two Davids, two Brown University PhDs. In order to navigate this, I think what I'll do is I'll call Dave Altig Dave and David Ribar David, and hope that that works. So we'll start it out with a question that tries to just set a baseline of facts and orient the club to sort of what the reality is. And I'll turn to Dave Altig to start. So, you know, what are the important facts? What have been the long-term trends? What do you think is important to understand what has been going on in terms of income inequality?
Well, thanks, Dennis. And it's really a great pleasure to be here with you virtually, which was in person, but we'll do the best we can. In this case, I think a couple pictures are really worth thousands of words. So if we can pull up, I've got just a couple slides. So if we could pull those up. This is a picture. It comes from the Congressional Research Service up through right before the pandemic period of the evolution of the income distribution by quintile all the way back to the late 1960s, which is about the earliest we have this sort of data for. And there's a couple things I want to point out in this picture as a fact basis. First of all, this issue of increasing income inequality has been with us for a very, very long time. If you go back to the early 60s and you sort of look at that top quintile, that top 20% of income earners, or the fourth quintile, the next, you can see a very clear divergence in the income earned by the top income earners in the country, and the differential of that with the bottom quintile. So this is not new. It has accelerated in the last 20 years or so. There is an interesting period, if you look at this picture, between 2000 and 2010, when income inequality really didn't grow much, if at all. It actually fell slightly. But that's also a period where incomes did not grow over the period at all, as a result of the two recessions, and in particularly that second recession. Those gray bars are recessions. And of course, that second one is the financial crisis. So in periods of growth, that growth has clearly not been shared equally across the population, and income inequality has grown pretty steadily since the 1970s. Now, next, if we go to the next slide, maybe that's not even the most problematic picture, because you could make the case that income inequality growing, when we look at the entire population, is not a huge problem if there is a lot of mobility and opportunity underneath those statistics I showed you in the previous paragraph. But I think we all know that's not the case, and I'm sure you have seen this sort of map before. This is a picture of relative income mobility, and it asks the following question: What if your parents were in the lower 25% of income earners? What's the probability that you were also in the lower 25% of income earners by the time you were 35? So this is looking at kids that were, born about 35 years ago. The data is roughly up to 2018, and the blue areas are the areas that indicate being born in places where there is higher mobility, and the red areas as where there is lower mobility. And it's not very hard to pick out Atlanta and the Southeast there as the poster child for bad mobility. Now, again, this is relative, so someone's always in the bottom tier of these things, but absolute mobility has been growing as well. Immobility has been growing as well. So not only have we seen more and more inequality in incomes, we've seen less and less capacity for individuals to move up the income ladder across time. So with that set of terrible facts, I think we set the stage.
David Ribar, I know you look carefully at policies and local policies, state policies, and so forth. And it's my impression that some of these statistics are presented pre-tax, that's called market income, and then after tax and social assistance. Is there a difference? Do the trends, do the relative degree of inequality look different if you go after tax and after social assistance?
So first of all, Dennis, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be with the Rotary. So the figures that Dave showed are actually after-tax figures. So we do have a little bit of an issue in terms of how poverty is measured and how incomes are measured in the U.S. But the numbers that Dave presented are after-tax and post-transfer figures. The part that those figures don't capture are in-kind benefits. So those figures do not include things like Medicaid, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps. They wouldn't include anything where there was a voucher or a service. But even when you include those numbers, the trends are still very much the same. And just to sort of add to some of the bad news that Dave was sharing, we think of the U.S. as being exceptional, and unfortunately, it's really exceptional in this regard. So income inequality is growing across almost all high-income countries, but the U.S. remains a world leader in unequal outcomes. So, the next closest is way behind us in terms of the amount of inequality. Normally, we wouldn't mind inequality so much if incomes were growing for all groups. But one of the things that Dave's figures showed is that incomes for households in the lowest quintile, so it's the lowest 20%, have been virtually unchanged. And in fact, the average income for households in the lowest quintile in 2020, which is the last year for which we have data, are actually lower than they were in 2006. The threshold for being in the lowest quintile is effectively the poverty rate. So in 2020, the poverty threshold for a household of four was just over $26,000. and the threshold for being in the lowest quintile was $27,000. So we're talking about nearly a fifth of U.S. households being impoverished.
Are we able to measure that cohort that is actually in the cash economy, meaning they really don't participate in the let's just call it the formal economy? They're part of the informal economy. And when I was at the Federal Reserve, we talked about this from time to time, and this simply wasn't good data. So, David Ribar, what's your thought on that?
That data is hard to capture administratively. So someone who's being paid under the table, we wouldn't observe unemployment insurance earnings or Social Security earnings. So our two big administrative sets. And we wouldn't observe tax data for them. But the data that Dave was reporting is actually survey data. And people do report those sources of income to survey folks. Mm-hmm. So we do know that there is an underground economy, that there is a cash economy, but that seems to be better reflected in the current population survey, which is the survey that provided those statistics, than it is through some other sources.
I'll ask both of you to comment on the root causes that are underpinning these trends and this situation. So, Dave Altig, what root causes would you emphasize?
Boy, is that a big question? There are many, but I think that what I would like to emphasize is the one that we spend a lot of time and have been spending a lot of time working on at the Atlanta Fed. And that is that the systems that we have built up to try to pull people up out of poverty and up the income ladder are really pretty broken, largely as a result of fragmentation. And as an economist, I want to say as a result of actually not thinking very hard when we construct public assistance and workforce development programs about the incentives that people face, or more specifically, the disincentives to career advancement, skill attainment, and the things that education, the things that we know are central to actually kind of building for yourself a better future. And those problems have only sort of gotten worse over time as the dynamics of the economy have really shifted the nature of work and the nature of jobs that are available in very, very fundamental ways that really require us to focus attention on skill building and attainment. And we are just way, way behind the curve. And as I said, facing a very broken system.
David, would you like to comment on root causes, what you think are the drivers here?
Yeah, so economists distinguish between three sets of potential causes here. So things that maybe shift the supply of labor out, and that might lead to lower wages or an oversupply in some areas. Things that shift the demand curve towards one group or another, and then institutional features. We don't think that supply is a big driver. So I know that there's a lot of talk about immigration and unauthorized immigration, but currently there are about as many unauthorized immigrants as there were 20 years ago. So that really hasn't shifted. Authorized immigration is actually a little bit lower right now than it was. We're not seeing large groups of people entering the labor force the way that we would have in the 1970s when the baby boom was entering the labor force, or the way that we saw in the late 1990s when there was a large increase in women entering the labor force. So we don't think it's on the supply side. On the demand side, people point to two things. One is a huge premium on skilled labor. And as Dave mentioned, not enough skilled labor. So the returns to skill have gone up, and that's pushed some of the inequality. We also think that changes to the economy through trade and offshoring have also affected the demand for certain types of workers. But that's actually been a really uneven change in demands. So the change in trade appears to have hurt people in the center of the country, and it's had less of an effect along the edges of the economy. And then that leaves institutional features. And that's really where the US is distinct from other countries. So for instance, in Georgia, right now, we have nearly 500,000 children in Georgia who are in poverty. Of those children, only 14,000 are receiving cash benefits from the TANF program. So at the time that I graduated from or finished my PhD, about 2/3 of people who were poor, or 2/3 of children who were poor, were receiving cash benefits. And now, like I said, in Georgia, it's down to about 3% of children are receiving cash benefits. There was a bright spot last year. So COVID was absolutely awful for income inequality. So in 2020, all the trends got worse. So low-income people were hurt the worst from the COVID crisis. But last year, there was a almost universal child tax credit. The child tax credit paid $3,000 per child to children 6 to 17, and $3,600 per child for children 0 to 5. By that way, the $3,000 per child is exactly equal to the average TANF benefit in Georgia. So large payment to children. And it's estimated that one policy cut child poverty nearly in half. So Columbia University estimates that child tax credit cut child poverty by 45% in 2021. But that child credit has not been renewed and may fall by the wayside.
David, I'm going to ask you a question because I think Dave Altig probably cannot easily address it, at least during the blackout period. And that is that it's been widely argued that, in effect, monetary policy, low interest rates have fueled asset appreciation, asset inflation, assets largely owned by the affluent and the wealthy, and has exacerbated income inequality, if you will, or wealth inequality. Could you, David Ribar, comment on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that's changed income inequality is actually the share of income that goes to capital and that's paid out in the forms of dividends and other things versus the share that's going to labor or going to workers. And that's increased. And Dave had pointed to a time during the 2000s where income inequality wasn't changing very much. That also corresponds to a prolonged, a flat spot in the stock market. So the stock market was pretty terrible for the first half of the 2000s, and not surprisingly, income inequality didn't change that much. And during the Great Recession, the first group to really feel the Great Recession was actually the wealthy. So again, the crash in the stock market losses in assets actually shrunk income inequality a bit during the start of the Great Recession.
I want to get into the question of maybe the differential impact of these trends on different population groups and so forth. But before doing that, since you just made those points, David Ribar, we are in a tight labor market. It seems to be quite different than in some respects than the pre-COVID labor market, and wage increases, wage inflation, if you will, is occurring, and some of the reasons for the tight labor market may be durable or they may be sticky. So, Dave Altig, do you think we're at an inflection point in some way that the labor market conditions in the future will actually help reduce the income inequality that particularly in the lower income groups that they have been experiencing?
Well, first of all, thanks for not asking me questions that are going to get me fired.
Yeah.
And you know, you're well acquainted with my forecasting ability, so so I want to be modest about this. But I think I personally think the answer is no, because in many ways, what we're talking about is episodic or business cycle related kind of tightness in the labor market. And I really, really believe that the problem is much more structural and fundamental in that. So I'll go back to that picture I showed on the inequality trends at the beginning. This has been with us for a very long time. Now it's accelerated during different periods of time. And as David said, there are different episodes where the increase in inequality is not as significant as others. But when these sorts of episodes where there's tightness in the labor market are played through, which they always are, we still find ourselves on this sort of path of not really having kind of resolved the issue that's making, again, as David said, the United States an outlier among advanced economies in particular with respect to just not simply getting this problem resolved.
Let's talk a little bit about the effect on particular populations within our society. And here I'm thinking of if we can do this verbally as opposed to statistically, talk a little bit about the conditions among minority groups, African Americans, Latinos, gender differences, maybe rural versus urban differences. There are various cuts that can be made of the population. David Ribar, can you characterize, I guess is the way to put it, characterize or give us a flavor for how these trends impact different population groups?
So, the inequality has gotten worse. Wages have gotten worse for the people with the least skills. So people who haven't completed high school or have just only completed high school, their wages have been going down and things have been getting worse for them. People of color have not benefited from the economy to the same extent that other groups have benefited. So we haven't made that much progress in closing gaps. One interesting thing during this last recession, during the last few recessions have tended to be men's recessions, where men's unemployment tends to go up more than women's unemployment. But the COVID recession was the first recent women's recession where women's unemployment actually rose substantially higher higher than men. So it's been unequal outcomes, and several of those unequal outcomes have been exacerbated during the last year.
Dave Altig, any comments on particular effects on population groups?
Well, first, let me follow up on David's point about the previous two recessions really sort of being man sessions, they used to call them, and the circumstance in the pandemic recession of last year, and the continuing difficulty in recovering from it. One of my colleagues, Melinda Pitts, who you know well, has done some research on this. And apropos David's comment about childcare, one of the things she discovered is that employment loss and the lack of employment gain as the economy has recovered is highly concentrated in single women with children who are below the age of 6. And it's very striking in the data that this is a group that's disproportionately impacted. I mean, I think we all know, that the effect of poverty, the effect of income inequality is disproportionately hits, in particular, non-white, non-Asian populations, disproportionately hits the rural population. It's an interesting kind of dilemma to think about what are the sets of policies that we can promote that are sort of what I might call generic or general palliatives to the problem of the lack of mobility, lack of resilience, lack of income prospects, and then which ones we have to kind of invoke to address very directly the disproportionately impacted populations. And I think that is actually a real challenge, and one that we really don't have much of our arms around at this point.
I want to go there in a moment. The there being talking about more sort of close to the ground life experiences of people who are affected by income inequality, the policy questions, and what can be done about it. But before we sort of take this down to the ground level, let me ask each of you to give a very big picture or answer a very big picture question. And that is really, what are the consequences of not addressing this particular problem? It's sort of the why should we care question, or should we being society do something about this? And if so, why? What could be consequences of essentially allowing this to continue, this situation continue as it is? I'll start with David Ribar.
So there are two big consequences. One is that a large swath of children just aren't getting a fair start. So they aren't getting the opportunities that they should have, and we're creating a problem that's going to persist down the road. The other is that this kind of inequality contributes to the U.S. pulling itself apart. A lot of the political tension that we're seeing right now is coming from groups that feel like they've been left behind. And that's not necessarily the groups that are in the lowest quintile, although they have every reason to feel that they've been left behind. But the stagnation that we've seen in incomes extends up to the second quintile and even into the third quintile. And what we're seeing is a hollowing out of the middle of the economy. And again, large numbers of people who are just losing faith in the U.S. economy.
Dave Altig, your comment on this this sort of cosmic question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as a macro economist and someone who's thinking about the aggregate economy, the answer is you simply do not want to leave cash on the table. And by living in a situation where people are not maximizing the return of their own abilities, that's a return to all of us, or the failure to realize a return to all of us. So we could be growing faster, we would be more productive, we would quite apart from the social issues, which I actually quite agree with as problematic. There is a bottom line issue here in not addressing the inequality and mobility problem, not addressing the resilience problem, and it's one that it's costing us, quite frankly.
Okay, let's talk about how inequality manifests itself in the lives of people. And David Ribar, I think you've done much research on this. Can you give us a bit more color? It's one thing to talk about income inequalities, another thing to talk about how people actually live under circumstances of income inequalities. Can you walk us through some of those insights or those observations?
Yeah, so it effectively takes up so much more bandwidth for people to be in situations where they're insecure or worse, when they're suffering from the issues of poverty. One of the ways that the U.S. Tries to distribute assistance is through a whole host of in-kind programs. And I don't know that people realize that each of those programs requires an application that's at least as complicated as a tax form. The programs are uncoordinated, and you have to go and ask for this thing here, this thing here, this thing here, this thing there. Once you're on the programs, you have to recomplete that paperwork every so often. And just going through the paperwork hassle associated with being on public assistance, never mind any stigma issues or other issues, just requires an amount of bandwidth. There have been a number of studies that have taken a look at family functioning, just simple mental processing when you're in a period of poverty. And there are just so many other things that people are worrying about that they don't have the mental energy to tend to other things that would be better to look at. So, just making things simpler for people, making things more secure for people would go a long way towards helping.
Dave Altig, you may or may not have access to research on what I would call perverse feedback loops within the lives of people who are in the bottom quintile, for example. I think of financial stress leading to health problems, for example. Have you or your colleagues looked at research that gets into some of those implications of being under financial stress?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would really just sort of reiterate what David said. I mean, being poor is probably the hardest job in the world, and one that you don't really have to think of much more than issues associated with, for example, a lack of resilience, which leads you into financial crisis in many cases, which then leads to sort of if you run into some problems, you lose access to credit, and you may lose access to employment in many cases because you have to deal with so many auxiliary issues just to get through the day and to get through kind of these periods of crisis. So, I mean, we do emphasize when we think of things like this problem, not just mobility, but resilience. That's incredibly important. And as David said, the systems that we have to kind of help people through periods of crisis are fragmented. They can be very difficult to access. Many of them, like childcare and housing, are rationed. They basically, there are many people who are eligible for the programs that we've set up, but simply cannot access them because there isn't a child care facility open in your neighborhood. There's not the sort of housing, lower income housing that's available near a place of employment. All of these things bundle up together to create a massive logistical problem that people of low incomes and even moderate incomes have to navigate, and which are made more and more difficult by virtue of the fact that we have not really thought of coherent systems to help people through periods of crisis and periods of development, so that they will kind of be able to stand on firmer ground. It's one of the reasons I think that this problem persists.
We think of educational attainment as one way to address income disparities, and yet I've read articles recently that talk about the burden of student debt on college graduates who come from backgrounds where there's not a lot of family wealth, and the only way they're going to complete college is through borrowing, and how that has created, if you will, income inequality because of choices that relate to dealing with their debt, or let's just call it wealth and income inequality. David Ribar, do you have any insight into the student debt question?
Not so much the student debt. A lot of that debt is actually concentrated among people from higher quintiles in the education system or in the income system. But things that you think would help have surprisingly little effect. So, for instance, take Georgia's Hope Scholarship program. So the Hope Scholarships are Georgia's largest financial aid system. The system is allegedly merit-based. Hope Scholarships changed some years ago, where there's now two sets of scholarships. So there's a full tuition Zell Miller scholarship. There's a partial tuition Hope scholarship. But it turns out that white students get Zell Miller scholarships at 6 times the rate that Black students get them. White students are twice as likely to have any scholarship money from the state of Georgia than Black students are. And once Black students get to college, they're more likely to lose their scholarships and less likely to gain scholarships than other groups are. So the supports that we have, the way that we distribute money, does things to reinforce inequality and to reinforce outcomes. You see the same types of statistics when you just take a look at things by income. So high-income households in Georgia are much more likely to get a Zell Miller scholarship or a Hope scholarship than low-income households are. And that contributes to some of the statistics that Dave was presenting before about a lack of economic mobility, resources going to the highest income households and not to the lowest income households.
David, let me follow up with the question of ask you to do a summary of the overall situation in Georgia, and to what extent is our state and our city somehow an outlier or somehow different than broadly across the Southeast or the country? Can you just summarize the Georgia situation?
The Georgia situation is similar to other southern states. So more income inequality here, fewer transfers here. Georgia was a pioneer in providing the Hope Scholarship. So, that we were the first state to provide that. So there are some policies that have helped, but we're similar to other southern states. Not as extreme as some others. So I think overall, an organization called Child Trends, which does a kids count index, rates the situation for children in different states. Georgia is 38th out of 50 states in overall child well-being, and 36th in economic well-being. So not at the bottom, not as bad as some other places, but not as good as most other states.
As we look at policy options to address this, Dave Altig, I remember a conversation some years ago where you talked about benefit cliffs that people who are receiving benefits face, and the rational decision not to earn more money in some cases. Can you just explain for our audience what a benefit cliff is?
Yeah, so benefit cliffs are essentially the phenomenon where an individual on public assistance that is means tested, which is basically all public assistance, loses those benefits as they earn even sometimes relatively small amounts of income. So David mentioned TANF, SNAP, housing assistance, childcare, all of these things come into play, and they can be very, very severe. We have done analysis, and I would invite everyone to go to our Advancing Careers website at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta that illustrates that in many, many cases, the return to higher skill levels by investing in your own human capital and your own education can be completely wiped out by the fact that you lose a critical public assistance by attempting to better yourself and move yourself through your own investment in your own skills up the income ladder. It creates large disincentives. It really is exactly like a disincentive of any tax, because it's a tax on individuals at the lower income, lower part of the income distribution. And it is a flaw in the design of our public assistance systems, which is a barrier actually to moving people into situations where they are self-sustaining. And one of the pieces of information that we provide through this analysis is that in many cases, the return to the taxpayer, by say moving someone from a minimum wage job to something like a licensed practical nurse, is positive, and much more positive for the taxpayer than it is for the individual. So, I made an allusion earlier to leaving cash on the table. We're leaving a lot of cash on the table, and unless we sort of get our arms around it, it's going to keep sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the program where that cliff is the worst is actually for the state children's health insurance program. So a lot of programs have tapered reductions, but Medicaid and S-CHIP, it's a all or nothing. You're either receiving it or you're not, and that presents a ginormous cliff. There's a similar cliff associated with employers providing health insurance. So there's a phenomenon called job lock, where people stay with a particular company. It might not be the best match for them, but that company offers health insurance and other companies don't. So the uneven provision of health insurance causes lots of problems, and that's an easily fixable problem.
Let me invite any questions from the audience. In the chat box on the side, I don't see any yet, but certainly want the audience to participate if possible. I will maybe ask each of you, a very difficult question, and in a couple of sentences, describe what you think a desirable end state is. Where should we be trying to arrive in dealing with income inequality? Dave Altig, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's a complicated question. We want everyone to be able to maximize their own potential by pursuing the opportunities that they most want to pursue without barrier, and that means access to systems, including educational systems, but also including the systems that kind of are built to help people that actually work to promote those goals rather than impede those goals. And unfortunately, we're not there.
David Ribar?
And I would just put in a plug for pressuring Congress to renew the child tax credit. The child tax credit did an awful lot of good last year. It's a way to redistribute money to children and to lift children out of poverty. And it's something that we could get done in the next few months and would contribute a lot.
President Catherine, I'm going to turn it back to you. Let me just say thank you to both Davids here for a very deep discussion of a very tough subject. I think we all care about this and care about what it's doing to our society. And it's a hard one to get our arms around. You guys have done a fabulous job of giving us much more sense of what this is all about. So thank you both for your program today.
And thank you very much, Dennis, for great questions and for the opportunity to talk.
Thanks.
Yes, Dennis, yep. David, what a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, all three of you. Such a deep and meaty topic, and we sincerely appreciate you getting us grounded in the facts and just thinking through the economics of all of this. This goes hand in hand in many ways with a topic that's been a strategic focus of our club, the whole area of early childhood education. And I'm sure the three of you are seeing how that area feeds into this whole domino effect of what's going on. So we appreciate your getting us better educated and ready to continue pursuing that topic as a club. So thank you. Mm-hmm. Appreciate it. Just another reminder, next week we continue our conversation led by Dennis Lockhart. We have a special treat with Alan Levy, the chair of neurology at the Emory School of Medicine. He will be speaking with us about the exciting potential of personalized medicine. And then, as Dennis mentioned, please stay tuned for our rescheduled program with Raphael Bostic, President and CEO of the Atlanta Federal Reserve. We look forward to having everyone back in person with Raphael to continue this very important economic conversation. Hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you.